Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. Wow, he thinks he stands a chance, Deidara pointed out mockingly. He does, confirmed Sasori with a nod of the puppet's head. IG could hear and feel the curiosity coming from the latter. As if the man couldn't understand how he thought he could take them. Keeping an eye on everything with Senjutsu, IG took a look inside, checking on his only companions for the moment. Kij and Hakai might not be able to do much, but they could help him process information faster, maybe notice something that he didn't. Sachigumo, for her part, would be invaluable in the coming fight. We are ready, IG Hakai said, easily taking over the smallest bit so that they could share his senses. Let's do this, Kij agreed. The chakra beast, for her part, barked loudly, almost enthusiastically. The chakra she was already feeding him increased and he felt his strength increase. Fortunately, it wasn't enough to leak outside. He wouldn't want to tip his opponents on that just yet. Or maybe not, Deidara corrected with a tilt of his head and a slight widening of his smirk. What happened, little? Before he could finish that question though, IG flickered to the side. Instantly, he created a clone that dispelled just as fast. Okay, the team knows what's up now, he thought, analyzing the situation. That was rude, Deidara continued, demonstrating that he could easily follow his movement. Both him and his partner were already facing him. Yeah, because sending explosive creations that the other person can't see is polite, IG thought to himself. He didn't say it though, better to leave them thinking that he didn't know about that. Once more, before the man could finish speaking, he sent electromagnetic murder towards both of them. It wouldn't do anything, he knew, to them at least, since they easily dodged the technique. However, the lightning release technique did fry Deidara's clay creations. Senjutsu is bullshit, he thought then. He either had forgotten or didn't initially even know that the explosive constructs were made of mainly earth release, which, as it happened, was weak to lightning. However, his Senjutsu sensing had told him that, just as it told him that Deidara had earth and lightning affinity, which was probably the combination for explosion, and Sasori had a wind one. You are a little shit, aren't you? Deidara asked then, clearly growing annoyed, especially by IG's ruining of his creations. Too bad. Thank you, IG said, using the same mocking tone the blonde had used. Then he twisted his body to dodge a senbon coated in poison. Sasori had grown tired of their little game, it seemed. Start taking this seriously, the puppet master told his partner. That clone was to tell his team that we are here, he added. Well, there goes that, IG thought with a grimace. It had been too much to ask that they would play around until the team arrived, but one could dream. Or, find Deidara all but whined, guiding his bigger clay sculptures to attack him. IG noticed, however, that the ones that were invisible to the eye were kept where they were. Oh, he doesn't want them getting caught in the fire if I use more lightning. I could use that though. He considered. It'd be better to save it for its main target, Kij pointed out, and IG had to reluctantly agree with that. It'd make things so much easier though, that he was very tempted. Sending another electromagnetic murder at the coming constructs, the boy continued dodging senbon. It seemed that Sasori would make those things rain on him. Fortunately, they were not easy, but he could dodge them just fine. Especially without the clay creations to get in the way. You are an annoying little shit, Deidara growled, frustrated as another of his vaguely humanoid creations lost life after being hit by lightning. You are ruining my art. Katsu. Iji's eyes widened. There's none close to me, what? Fuck. The explosion hadn't been intended for him. A random clay creature that had been behind the closest ones blew up, sending those straight at Iji, making him flicker away. That was close. There was no rest for him though, because Sasori had easily followed his trajectory, contrary to Deidara's creations. Evidently, the clay constructs were much slower than their master, that was for sure. Not that it mattered much, since they were practically everywhere. Oh, that fucker is making more, he noticed with growing annoyance. Looking down, he groaned. There's a construct that gathers the clay I disabled, of course there is. Focus and dodge, will you? Hakai hissed when a Senbon came a little too close for comfort, making Iji grimace. She was right though, so far it seemed easy enough to just keep evading attacks until an explosion happened behind him. Fuck, jinxed it, he thought, flickering away from the flying clay construct. Apparently, Deidara liked that strategy, because explosions started going off everywhere, sending his creation everywhere but mostly at Iji wherever his flickers took him. I have to keep this up, just a little. Your team won't arrive in time at this rate, you know that, right? Deidara mocked then, his annoyance apparently having been washed away by all the explosions he'd caused. He was right, of course. The team had gone in a completely different direction. Even with the clone message, it would take them a while to get there. You plan to keep dodging for that? He didn't finish his question though, because a wire wrapped around his ankle and electrocuted him. Nobody expects that, Iji thought with a grin as he flickered towards the twitching man. Fuck. He cursed to himself when he saw the blonde substitute himself with a clay clone. He flickered away again, disappointed. That would have been too easy, I guess. Oh, you are gonna pay for that, Deidara growled from the side. Interestingly, both him and his partner ceased their attacks. Iji had to double-check with his senjutsu sense to see if there was something he was missing, but no, the only thing he noticed was that Sasori's puppet had run out of senbo. From its mouthpiece, at least. Speaking of natural energy points, 831/1375. We are good, he thought, taking a deep breath to calm himself down a little as he faced the pair. This is going better than I thought. Turned out to be quite problematic, Sasori said then, drawing an annoyed look from Deidara. I know, no need to rub it in, the blonde shot back. Let's get this over with, he added, before sticking his hand on the clay pouch on his side. I don't like the sound of that, Iji thought, taking a step back. He liked it even less when a puff of smoke appeared next to Sasori and a new puppet appeared. Is that, it is, he growled internally. Iji Hakai started, but he was already at it. How are you holding up, girl? The boy asked as he finished activating World Ender. Power coursed through him as his stats raised. Keep the cards hidden, he reminded himself as Sachigumo barked confidently. He still had a lot of tricks to use, but he didn't want to pull everything out and get smacked into the ground when both Akatsuki members decided to go all out. How do I win though, he asked himself. He had plans to hold them back, but going on the offensive. How did he do that? Deidara would just replace himself with clay and Sasori would do the same with a puppet, which worked both as defensive and offensive. It's not like I can. Can I? Worth a try, Kij commented, and Iji smirked, cracking his neck just as Deidara unleashed his clay dragon. "So kind of you to wait patiently," the blonde told him. "Now, kindly just die." And with that, his partner's puppet started moving, or, more specifically, opened its mouth. Iron Sand IG recognized instantly. "Well, I gotta give you guys a chance, right?" he said, trying to look as confident as he sounded. "I can do this," he told himself. He knew he could beat them. He had the information, the techniques, the stats and the skills for it. He knew it, but he just couldn't help but fear them. Akatsuki just sounded like so much more than it probably was, in his mind at least. They were no Madara or Kaguya, however, they were beatable. And still. "You can do it," IG Hakai reassured. Somehow, those words coming from someone else other than himself were much more effective, even if that someone was a mind construct he'd made. "They don't know what they are in for," Kage said, and he could almost hear the conviction there. Sachigumo flooded him with her faith in him. "Let's do this," he thought as the iron sand started taking shape in the air and the clay dragon opened its mouth. As the dragon spat out a smaller one at him and the sand-made projectiles flew, IG started flickering around to dodge. He also started planning. He had an idea, but he needed to use it well, because it was quite possibly a one-time use thing. "That dragon is annoying though," he thought, looking as the construct started flying with the Akatsuki members on top of it. "That has to go," Kage said, to which all of them agreed. "And I have just the thing," IG shot back. The jutsu that had inspired Sacred Flock. Less chakra intensive and less focus dependent. Lightning Release, Huoyu, LVL1 Max. A rank technique with which the user creates a lightning bird to attack for him. Consumption, 100 chakra points. Plus creator bonus. Increases speed by 25%. Increases damage by 25%. The bird immediately came to life, lightning cackling as it took shape. It illuminated the surrounding area as its wings spread wide open before taking flight towards the clay construct. IG could see it in Deidara's face. He'd just screwed him over majorly. Sadly, he couldn't quite admire that expression, since he still had iron sand to dodge. Evidently, Sasori had much better control of his emotions. And IG had to give him credit. He wasn't even disturbed by Deidara's desperate attempts to keep his dragon away from the lightning bird. To the blonde's credit, his other clay constructs on ground still moved towards IG2. Thus, his flickering continued. "God bless you, Sachigumo," he thought, receiving a pleased bark in response. "And God bless Anko for giving me this technique," he added. He'd be sure to give his teacher a big thank you. Maybe he'd cook a hell of a lot of dango for her or something. "I certainly owe her that much." "Think of your thank you gifts later," IG Kage told him, unimpressed. "I'm just why finally," he thought as the Huoyu hit one of the dragon's wings, which rendered the limb useless. Therein why the creature started falling from the sky. Setting his plan in motion, IG flickered on top of one clay construct, then to an iron sand one, and so on, moving up towards the dragon. Just a bit more there. Once he was close enough and had a clear path, he threw New Iberi as hard as he could. The legendary sword flew true towards Sasori, the one that he didn't have any advantages over. "Think it'll be that easy, do you?" Deidara mocked as his partner supplanted himself with a clay construct too. "Not the puppet I expected," IG thought calmly as he pulled his arm back. "Maybe you should look back," the blonde mocked then, but the boy knew exactly what he was talking about already. Twisting his body midair, he dodged the blade tail of Sasori's armor. The puppet master had apparently decided to use substitution behind him. IG, for his part, would have flickered away from him instantly, but knew Ivory was still flying and moving, so suddenly could screw that up. Besides, just a little and... What did Dara choked out? Then he screamed as electricity started coursing through him. It wasn't so much that than the fact that it was doing so through a wire that went through his chest. His hands clasped over where New Ivory had flown straight through him. Yes, IG said as Sasori looked at his partner. I do think it'll be that easy. Dodging an iron sand construct and then the tail thing of Sasori's armor, he moved away. His focus was mostly on New Ivory and its wire though, as he moved the sword back towards himself and the thread to wrap around Didara. He needed to truly leave him out of the fight, no unexpected comebacks or anything. He needed the legendary sword though, and that meant having access to its wire too. Thus, as he continued dodging the remaining Akatsuki's attacks, he was already working on moving some of his normal wire towards Didara. He doubted the guy would recover from the wound he'd inflicted, but he couldn't risk it. Then, all of a sudden, the attacks from Sasori stopped. I haven't done this since I joined Akatsuki, the puppet master said, and IG had a very good idea of what was coming as he warily looked at the man. Natural energy points, 312/1375. I'm about to lose Senjutsu, he realized with a grimace. However, he'd taken out one of them, which was the complicated part. Thank God for these guys never going all out from the start, he thought then. It wasn't very fair though, he supposed. After all, he probably would have underestimated someone like himself too. No time to dwell on that, IG Hakai reminded him. TCH, wish I hadn't had to dedicate so much time to the other technique, he thought as he looked at Sasori's armor being taken off. The Kazekage puppet stood next to its master too, while the man showed that he'd made himself a puppet. A powerful fire jutsu would be nice right about now, he lamented as he took on his three opponents. His eyes focused mostly on Sasori's heart or whatever that thing in his chest was supposed to be. He didn't remember much about the man, but he was fairly sure that was his weakness. It was nice to have it be so obvious, but there was a slight problem with that. No way it'll be easy to get to that, he thought as he tried to plan for a way to pierce through the thing. Now that he'd used his new Ivory control to take out Didara, he'd have a harder time to reach that little target. Especially since there was no way Sasori didn't have a plan to cover that, or 1,000. Sasori wasn't done though, because pulling out a scroll and using it, he summoned what seemed to be around 100 more puppets. IG wasn't worried about that though. He was fairly sure that he could dodge everything the puppeteer threw his way. Even if he couldn't, World Ender should take care of any damage. He was safe. No, the problem was attacking the man. Because if he couldn't take Sasori out, then he'd lose the battle of attrition. Senjutsu would run out, his energy points would follow once he used his skills, and from there he'd have to rely even more on Sachigumo. A chakra beast she might be, but she couldn't battle forever, yet, at least. A wave of defiance told IG that she clearly disagreed with that, but both of them knew he was right. I hope you are ready, Sasori started, but IG flickered midway through his sentence. The man had tried to distract him with a little speech as an iron sand spike sprung from behind him. Fortunately, he still had Senjutsu active and sensing everything. He'd known for a while of that little scheme. IG Sata, he finished, almost sounding surprised. It seems that our intel was wrong. You are much more than we were led to believe. I have a way of surprising like that, yeah, IG commented, his mind still racing as he started spreading wires around. He'd need them once Senjutsu went down and he couldn't sense stuff as easily. Not anymore, Sasori said then, not menacingly though, but in that flat tone that someone uses to explain something that just is. It grated on Iji's nerves, even if he knew that the man was wrong and that he shouldn't care. Then he felt Sachigumo apologize. Don't worry, girl, he reassured before focusing back on the battle as the small army of puppets rushed at him. Rude, he thought as he started dodging, even if Sasori had no way of knowing he was interrupting. Sachigumo agreed with him on that front completely. The crack of wood breaking apart filled his ears as he kicked one of the puppets straight in the chest in annoyance. As he started fighting them, he couldn't, unfortunately, break them all. After all, the iron sand always seemed to get in the way when he tried. Fortunately though, Sasori seemed to have overestimated himself a little, because the sand isn't working quite as well as it had before. Evidently, the army of puppets on top of a bloodline limit like that was a bit much even for him. He was distracted by the sound of a puppet being destroyed by someone that wasn't him. So much so that another one stabbed his thigh. Punching the offending thing away, he took out the dagger. Thank God for World Ender, he thought as he saw the poison on the weapon. Flickering, he put himself away from the army to be able to focus and see what was up. A smile formed on his face. Took you long enough, he said then as he flickered next to Teiya, watching as her eye twitched but she continued playing her flute. Looking around, he saw Tamrai give her fan a swipe, hitting the majority of the puppets with a strong gust of wind. In the middle of the fray, he saw Jirobo and Yujito fighting like he imagined he'd just been doing. Kabuto was slightly behind those two, likely ready to heal Jirobo in case he needed it. Natural energy points, 34/1375. Just in time, 2IG thought as he looked at the screen for a split second. Man, am I glad to see you, guys. Remind me to do something nice for you, he told Teiya then as he took a moment to compose himself. They really had arrived just in time. He'd been spiraling out of control a little. Unable to breathe or think. For a moment, he emptied his mind, simply listening to Teiya's music and using his wire to assist his team. Then he kicked his brain into gear once more. Mainly because Sasori wouldn't let him just stand there, sadly. The team could deal well enough with the puppet army, that much IG could see. However, the main three ones were another thing entirely. They could probably defeat Sasori's armor. He was fairly sure that Yujito could stand a chance against Sasori himself. The Kazekage was a different thing entirely. The second time the iron sand came a little too close to someone from his group, Jirobo to be exact, IG decided he'd rested enough. Natural energy points, 0/1375. Shame, that he thought as he activated all his energy skills. It wasn't the same, not even close, but it would do for the moment. Be ready, yeah, girl? He asked Sachigumo, who replied instantly, eager and determined to do a good job in the fight. She's fucking adorable even in this situation, my god. You are telling me, Kage grumbled. Poison resistance has gone up a level. IG considered that screen for a moment. Was he feeling the poison's effects at all? Was there anything strange going on? Was World Ender dealing with it or not? Because he really couldn't afford to drop in the middle of this battle. That would be bad. You are fine, Hakai reassured, and he nodded slightly before flickering into the battle. He moved with one objective in mind and one only. Taking out the Kazekage's puppet. That would cripple Sasori, he was sure. Dodging his way through the battlefield of artificial people and his team, IG kept an eye on everything with his web sense. While not nearly as precise as his senjutsu, it was enough at the moment. At least Sasori didn't have anything too small to feel with it, like Deidara did. However, New Iberi was stopped by the claw-like blades on the thing's right arm. Then, a buzzsaw appeared on its left, which it used to try and cut IG in half. Two flickers saw the Konoha nin standing behind the Kazekage puppet. Not gonna be that his thought was interrupted though, when a beam of water was shot in his direction and he barely had enough time to dodge it. Sasori himself had joined that fight. Iron sand constructs were immediately shot in his direction from the Kazekage, but that was an approach that wasn't possible anymore. Instead, IG flickered towards the puppet master, New Iberi piercing through his chest. Knew it, he thought bitterly as he looked at the empty socket where the remnants of Sasori's humanity should be. Evidently, he had a way to move them around. Still, that wouldn't stop him from doing some damage to the puppet that was the man's body now. With a twist and a slash, he broke apart his chest. Or tried to, since the iron sand had already reached him. This is really annoying, IG grumbled to himself. There was no opening he could use, and he was barely doing any damage. At least the team is cleaning out his other puppets. Deciding to try something else, he flickered towards back to the Kazekage and immediately did so back to Sasori. Seeing that the weak point wasn't there again yet, IG decided for a different target. A kick saw one of his arms destroyed. One beam less, he thought as he twisted around the water shooting from the remaining arm. Slow and steady, IG, slow and steady. Grimacing, he dodged again. This time it was the buzzsaw of the Kazekage that apparently had charged at him. Iron sand was gathering around them as he dodged everything that was thrown his way. The claw blades, the buzzsaw, Sasori's cable, the water beam. There were a lot of things to keep track of. Despite that, IG almost paused when he felt something strange appear in his web sense. A bird. The fuck is a bird doing so close to this shit show? He thought, baffled. Parrying away the Kazekage, he chanced a look at the creature and froze. It was a bird all right, but it wasn't alive at all. It was a metal bird. Katsu. IG heard someone shout and the bird he'd just been looking up exploded, sending him, the Kazekage and Sasori flying in different directions. No, that can't be, he thought, just then realizing that the wires he'd been keeping on him were not how he'd left them. Thought you would take me out that easy, huh? The voice said this time and IG turned. There stood Deidara, with a hand over his chest where New Iberi had pierced. You, the blonde growled. Those eyes, he continued, almost deliriously. I'll blow you up, he spat out with a wide grin. IG grew more and more worried, not only because of the deranged look of the man, but also because his skin was cracking at some points. No. He could only watch as the clay constructs that previously remained inert came to live once more all around them. Katsu, Deidara repeated, his face grinning and his voice mocking. Then everything exploded. IG wanted nothing more than to ask how. How had Deidara survived being pierced with a legendary sword through the chest? How had the man molded his wires into one of his explosive creations? How had he even moved with IG's wires tying him up? How had he just brought his clay constructs back to life at the drop of a hat? On the other hand, maybe he should just be grateful that Deidara hadn't gone nuclear just yet and had just exploded a whole lot of clay that had been around. He didn't have the time to think much, unfortunately. Desperately, as the dust Deidara's explosion had kicked up surrounded him, he felt through his web sense. Sasori was unbothered, IG realized as he dodged the Kazekij's buzzsaw. Not only was he persisting in their fight continuing, but he was also still fighting his team with the rest of the army of puppets. To add on to the bad news, the team wasn't doing so well. The explosions had clearly thrown them off their game. Yujito was holding her ground, but only barely. Jirobo and Kabuto, though, had been wounded and singed respectively. The wounds weren't that bad, but Sasori's poison certainly was. IG just hoped the Mednin would be able to deal with that. Otherwise they were fucked and there was nothing he could do about it at the moment. God bless Tamrai, he thought then as the girl blew away the cloud that had been covering the battlefield. At least Taeyuya and Tamrai hadn't been that affected by the commotion. They'd been hit by the explosion, but didn't seem to be worse for wear. Katsu. IG heard and he internally cursed as he flickered away from a clay creature that had sneaked on him. There's too much shit around. Then we should reduce the number, right? Hakai suggested, and IG had half a mind to give her a piece of his mind because it was so not the time to be a smart ace. It wasn't like he could just do that and had been choosing not. But you have, haven't you? What are trump cards if not for situations like this, IG? Kij agreed then, and the boy stopped in his tracks. The sudden change seemed to catch both Akatsuki off guard because they hesitated. Finally realized that you are done for, brat. Deidara spat out, a thin trail of blood coming out of his grinning mouth. Because even if you surrender I'll blow you up, you little shit, he added, his smile widening ever so slightly as he brought his hands up, his small army of clay creatures responding to the sign and approaching IG slowly. Yujito. Okay. She replied before he could even voice his order, and the battlefield felt the new presence for what it was. A force of nature had joined the fight. So, she was really the Nibi Jinchuriki, Sasori commented, his tone still that almost emotionless thing that had IG wondering how much of him was puppet and how much was still human. Neither of them was surprised, which the boy supposed was fair. There were 9 Jinchuriki, it would have been too much to ask for Akatsuki to not know them. Wishful thinking on my part, he thought with a weary smile. Still, chances were that the battlefield would be more even then. He shot an electromagnetic murder at a clay construct that had been charging at him. I'm so tired of his fight already, he thought, his eyes narrowing. Sachigumo? He asked. The chakra beast instantly flooded him with energy that he was sure would have manifested outwardly if not for the fact that he immediately used almost all of it. Sacred flock, he called in his mind, and the lightning birds came to life. Why won't you die already? Deidara shouted, what little was there of his sanity seemingly struggling to remain. How much chakra do you have? IG withheld a smirk at that. If only he knew. Still, the fight was far from over. Living thread, stunning thread and chakra flow worked together to make the wires he'd spread everywhere a weapon instead of just a tool to keep an eye on things. Let's finish this shit show, he thought as one of the steel strings wrapped around one of the Kazekij's legs. Sasori and his armor managed to dodge the ones coming for them, but IG could already work with what he'd gotten. Flickering towards the latter of those two, he smashed it to pieces. Sachigumo and World Ender together made for quite the punch, if he did say so himself. It was a shame that he hadn't been able to see what adding senjutsu on top of that would do to them. The thing wasn't done though. Even if most of its body was dead, the pieces could still function. This was evidenced by the blade tail thing twisting to try and cut him. making sure that there was no iron sand too close and that both of the other puppets were otherwise entertained by his wires and the flock. IG made sure that the armor puppet was completely destroyed before turning back to the battlefield. The birds were making a mess of everything in the best way possible. Not only were they repeatedly turning Didara's creations into useless clay every time they were touched by lightning, much to the man's obvious annoyance, but they were also aiding his team in their fight against the enemy army and keeping Sasori's main puppets busy too. Sachigumo barked something in his mind and he felt her pride and her joy at being successful in her first official battle. Just die already. He heard Didara scream then. Katsu. IG flickered away then, even if he didn't feel anything in his range. It turned out that was unnecessary too. The clay creation that exploded had been next to the Kazekage puppet. For a second, both Akatsuki members and IG himself stood still, confused. Then it clicked in the boy's mind. Teiya, you positively brilliant woman, I could kiss you, he thought to himself, fully intent on telling her that to her face at the first chance he got. A split second ahead of the two men, he flickered towards the puppet victim of Teiya's scheme. Just as his fist crashed through the thing's chest, he heard Didara let out a deranged shout that probably was supposed to be words but ended up being a rough, meaningless, angry scream. Evidently, someone wasn't too happy with being deceived. You, with those fucking eyes, Didara spat out, snarling like a rabid dog. And your fucking tricks. I'm tired of you, the man said, sticking his hands on his clay pouches. That can't be good, IG thought, immediately flickering towards him. It wasn't like he had better targets anyway. Sasori's body puppet was good, but it wasn't on the Kazekige's level, especially with one less arm to shoot elements out of. The boy could almost physically feel how the pressure of the Iron Sand's presence lifted from his shoulders. As if just to prove him wrong, Sasori, a stream of fire was shot between IG and Didara, stopping the former from reaching the blonde. That's a lot of fire, he thought, feeling the heat burning him even from a distance. He knew it already, but Sasori's cannons, or whatever those were no normal weapons. Still easier than the Iron Sand, gotta say, the boy grumbled to himself, switching targets immediately. In a split second, he was already on the puppet master. Just as he slashed with new ivory, ready to split the man in two, he was replaced by one of his other, much less impressive tools. That's fucking annoying. That's how everyone feels when you move around with the flicker. Just saying, Kage commented, and IG just knew he wasn't the only one annoyed by that. Sachigumo certainly made him know that, and if Hakai's groan was anything to go by, she was in agreement with them. Still, that had given him a moment, maybe. Flickering once more, he rushed towards Didara. He was stopped again, just like he'd been before. This time, however, he was ready. He was a distraction, after all. While the blonde's eyes were on him, two of his birds rushed him from behind. The man noticed them a second too late. It was almost surreal for IG, seeing a man that had once terrified him, twitching and screaming under one of his techniques. And I still have such a long way to go, he thought, because he knew that many of the other Akatsuki could wipe the floor with him. He was just fortunate enough that he'd had to face these two instead of Itakai and Kaizaime, for example. He didn't have time to dwell on that, however. He flickered, baiting Sasori's fire stream. He dashed again, narrowly stopping before he skewered himself with the puppet master's cable. One last flicker saw new ivory finally pierce through his target, Didara's head. For good measure, he used chakra flow through his sword, seeing the body twitch but little else. One down, this time for sure. IG coughed as he stomped on the man's chest, feeling the ribs crack under his foot. IG. He heard Tamrai scream, concern and fear bleeding into her tone. He smirked, his lips stained with blood as the red liquid dripped from his mouth. Sachigumo started barking, and he didn't have to be a genius or bonded with her to understand what she was saying. Kij and Hakai voiced their own worries too. I'm fine, IG thought, looking down at his chest, where 3 blades were coming out. Sasori hadn't been stupid, it seemed. I'm fine, he repeated, both to his mind companions and himself. His hand shook, his body now feeling the effects of the poison even through World Ender. Thank God for Iron Will, he added as he twisted his body and smashed the puppets to pieces. With his limbs trembling, he pulled the blades out of his body, letting his regenerative technique do its work. Turning to the remaining Akatsuki member, IG wiped the blood from his mouth and gave the man a smirk. One that grew wider when he saw Sasori look around, as if realizing what the situation was like for him. Poison resistance has gone up a level. Akatsuki won't underestimate you again, the puppet master said then, standing there, as if pensive. His little army was still fighting the team, but Yujito was decimating them already and she was not going to stop. What makes you think they'll know anything besides the fact that I beat you? IG asked curiously, his body calming down a little as World Ender continued aiding in its recovery from the poison. He wondered how soon he would have died without that technique. Of course, he knew the answer to his own question already. Zetsu was probably watching. He might not know much about the plant bastard and what he could do, but he had, or at least had once had, a distinct memory of him watching Sasuke and Naruto fight when the former defected along with some other things. That had, in turn, instilled in IG the fear that Zetsu could always be watching, doubly so if Akatsuki was involved. Akatsuki always knows, Sasori said ominously, but the boy only chuckled. And what makes you think that's all there is to me? IG shot back this time, blinking as he noticed the shudder in his breathing. Evidently, he'd overestimated World Ender or he'd underestimated Sasori's poison. He wondered which it was. The second, I'd wager, Hakai commented, still sounding slightly concerned. Evidently, even them, that knew him better than anyone else, had a moment of doubt when they saw the extent of his injuries. IG could hardly blame them though, it was a rather worrying sight. Akatsuki has people against whom you would stand no chance, Sasori told him, and he had to reluctantly give that point. He had very big doubts about how a fight against some of the members would go, that was for sure. Even if you have tricks up your sleeve, you'll die if you continue interfering. I hope you know that, IG Sata. Maybe, IG conceded, making the puppet master tilt his head. But you are targeting my brother and I can't have that, sorry. Should have picked something other than Jinchuriki as your target, he explained with an empty grin. Now, let's get this over with, yeah. It would. Before the man could finish, IG was already flickering to him. Sasori was prepared for that though, it seemed, because he was already mid-dodge when he arrived, and easily slipped around New Ivory. IG had to make his own dodging motion to avoid a stream of fire that came out of the man's remaining arm. His motions felt sluggish, but he supposed that was to be expected. World Ender was good, but it was better for normal wounds, as it were. Poison was a different thing entirely, and it was evident that he'd have to work to improve the technique's performance against such attacks. He was sure either Hakai or Kij would take a note of that. I did, now focus, damn it, Kij snarled at him. It wasn't IG's fault, honestly. There was so much to be aware of, he couldn't slip. A slip could mean that he wouldn't be prepared in the future. A slip could kill him at that very moment by one of Sasori's fire attacks. A slip could see him skewered by the puppet master's cable. A slip could see him. Sasori opened his mouth and out came a cloud of what could only be poison. Ig didn't even have time to react, getting a good breath of the obviously very dangerous attack before Tamrai could sweep it away with her wind. He heard her call for him, but it was just concern for his well-being. He didn't have the time for it. Instead of answering, he dodged the puppet that had rushed him from his blind spot and shattered it to pieces with a kick. With that done, he focused on the only real danger that remained. No slips, come on, he told himself. Just a bit more and we are done here. The blades on Sasori's back started spinning then, and Ig was acutely aware that they could cut off any of his limbs. Another thing to keep track of, easy, he thought sarcastically. Ig, Taeya wants to know if you want a boost. Tamrai called then, and he almost paused to think about that. Actually he was pretty sure he did, but his body kept moving. Keep on moving, Ig Hakai said, having been the one to move his body when he lost focus. Thanks, he thought out loud as he continued fighting, narrowly dodging the spinning blades when Sasori unexpectedly twisted his body midair with the help of his cable. The man had way too many tricks for Ig's liking. Is this really what others feel fighting me? He wondered. Do you want a good answer or an honest answer? Kij shot back. It is a shame that the amusement that should have been there for both of them wasn't. The two, together with Hakai, were too busy keeping track of Sasori's moves and possible attacks, just in case the other two weren't fast enough to react. Which was good, because, somehow, Sasori's army puppets kept coming to join their bout. How hasn't the team cleared those out already? Ig asked in disbelief. He keeps summoning more, Hakai answered, and he almost growled at that. He's being discreet about it, you wouldn't notice without paying attention to it. Good thing you have 2 more pairs of eyes, right? Because of course he does, the boy grumbled. And yeah, thank God for you too. There was a loud metallic sound when New Ivory stopped one of the spinning blades, giving Ig just a split-second opening to kick that weapon off Sasori. The other blades managed to cut halfway through his left arm before he could flicker. And thank God for World Ender, he added as the wound healed. Careful, Ig Hakai cautioned. We don't want to test if the jutsu can regenerate limbs, she reminded him, to which he could only agree. At that moment he caught a small puff of smoke behind Sasori. Ha, there goes another puppet for the team, I guess, he thought. Or me, he corrected when an army puppet started shooting needles at him. Before he could do something about it, the strongest gust of wind Tamrai had ever used shattered that puppet to pieces. Taeya's boost. Pretty sure that's not enough for that to happen, Ig mused, before sensing through his wires that Kabuto was on Tamrai. Ha, copying Taeya, Kabuto. Not sure she'll like that. Ig almost smiled when he noticed that his little paws had worked as intended, making Sasori take advantage of the opening. As the puppet master rushed him, remaining blades spinning and cable sneaking from a side, Ig's threads rose from the ground and wrapped around every limb and weapon, several times in some cases. It's over, Ig declared, taking a deep breath in. Indeed, Sasori agreed, but something was off, the boy could tell immediately. The man sounded almost pleased, and that made no sense. Of all times to start showing some real emotion, why at that moment? Ig. He heard Tamrai call, but he was unsure why. He wasn't injured this time and they had to have seen that he was all right. The fighting was done, Ig, Didara. the girl said then, and he felt his blood freeze over. He can't still be alive, he thought to himself, managing to kick Sasori away. Unfortunately, he did so hastily and thus he couldn't put enough force in the attack to shatter the man. He needed to check on. He stopped cold at what he saw. There was Didara's body, just like he'd left it. However, his skin was cracking even more than before, darkening to a color that was supremely unnatural. What the? Dead man's switch. He realized then. The blonde had laid a trap on him and he'd fallen for it. His mind raced, what could he do? If Didara had left behind the present IG thought he had. What could he do? There had to be something he could do, anything at all. His lightning birds crashed onto the man's body. And achieved absolutely nothing. Light was starting to shine through the cracks. IG moved. Oh. Onaki. Akatsuki couldn't be dealt with quickly enough. The Sashikage really hoped that Sato and his team could find them, because chaos reigned inside Iwagakure ever since that first incident. If Onaki was honest with himself, the news that one of his ninja had brought about the Weaver going on the offensive against Akatsuki brought a great deal of relief. Evidently, Didara held some sort of grudge against his home village, because the man had left bombs everywhere. Thus, Onaki's hands had been tied trying to protect his people. He couldn't afford to leave or even send someone else to assist the team, unfortunately. He was sure that had been the intention behind the explosions, but if that was the case, it had worked. He couldn't leave his village without risking everything for himself and his people. Sato would have to deal with the issue on his own, and Onaki prayed that he could, because the Sashikage was tired of the threat hanging over his head. That and the Weaver's time to stay inside the village had been running out for a while, now, it was almost over. If this last effort didn't work, they'd have to leave and Onaki wasn't a fan of what that would entail for his remaining Jinchuriki and village. The explosions seemed to really have stopped, Sashikage-sama, one of his ninjas, informed him. Not that he needed to be told that, but the words did bring some relief. Can we get going already? Another voice all but demanded and Onaki felt his eyebrow twitch. Agreeing to that was certainly a mistake, he thought to himself as he turned towards Kurotsuchi. The girl had arrived after her help was rejected by the Weaver, and thank God for that. And since then she'd been pestering him about joining the effort against Akatsuki. Yes, the Sashikage reluctantly agreed. Gather a group, we are going to look for them, he ordered the messenger before turning towards Kurotsuchi. You aren't coming, however. Instantly, the girl went to protest, but he was having none of that. No, Kurotsuchi. You are not going and that's final. It's an order from your Sashikage, he told her. Seeing her flinch as he pulled rank over here, something that he'd never had to do before that day. It was not something that he enjoyed, but it was necessary. He'd let his granddaughter get away with a lot of things, but going after Akatsuki wasn't one of them. Over his dead body. Fortunately, he had an argument that would work pretty well, he was sure. Did you stand a chance against any of his team members for this mission? Well, Yuki. The Ninken? He asked, interrupting her as he turned towards the dog in question, who had brought with her the location where Sato and the team were supposed to be engaging the Akatsuki duo. It was the only reason why they even entertained the idea that the explosions had really stopped in the first place. Apparently, Sato had either distracted Didara enough to stop the bombing or he'd taken the man out altogether. Onaki really hoped it was the latter case. She's pretty strong, Kurotsuchi protested, but Onaki could see that the argument wasn't enough even for her. The dog certainly enjoyed the praise though, but that was neither here nor there. No is no, Onaki informed her with finality, making the girl deflate where she stood. Sashikage-sama, a ninja, called from his side and he turned to see the team he'd asked for already gathered. He nodded at them, making their backs straighten. "One of you make sure my granddaughter stays right here," he ordered, earning himself a grandpa from said girl, which went ignored. "The rest of you, follow me." And thus, they were on their way to a fight that Onaki really hoped would mean the end of all the trouble he'd been dealing with as of late. He wasn't naive enough to think it would last, but some rest would be much appreciated. It was somewhat surreal, however. Of all things, he'd never thought he'd find himself in a situation where he would become the cavalry for a Konoha ninja. However, there he was, following a leaf ninken through his village and out. With some luck, he'd get a chance to fight something. He really could use that to relieve some of the stress Akatsuki had caused him. Smacking them around would certainly go a long way to making him feel better. And if it allowed him to repay how much Sato had helped his granddaughter's training, all the better. He'd never have admitted it out loud, but Kurotsuchi seemed to have progressed a lot more under the boy's guidance than she had any of the jounin he'd assigned to teach her in her life. Once he was gone, Onaki would have to see how Kurotsuchi's classes went with his people. It was possible that being his granddaughter had worked against her instead of in favor, he feared. The ninken, Yuki, barked something that Onaki was pretty sure meant they were close. He could have been able to tell that by himself, really, since they could already hear Deidara's fighting from a distance. It was a shame that the man was still alive. Or, they had, but the explosions had stopped a while ago and it made him curious as to what had happened to make that happen. In the end, the scene he arrived at wasn't what he'd been expecting. The puppet parts and the clay everywhere was something he'd foreseen finding, but what he hadn't expected was for Sato to be nowhere in sight. He'd almost turned to ask where he was to who he knew was his second-in-command, the Suna girl. However, the look on her face spoke volumes as she stared off to one side. Following her gaze, he was just in time to see what Sato was up to. There, in the distance, he saw an explosion that looked big enough to level an entire village. "Deidara?" he asked, almost speaking to himself. "Why blow up something there?" It was close, yes, but that explosion, impossibly big as it was, would hit absolutely nothing but mountain. "Because that wasn't one of Deidara's bombs, Tamrai," the Sand Kunoichi informed, and he noticed a waver in her voice and how pale she looked all of a sudden. "That was Deidara." "What? Then why?" "Because the boss took him there," the redhead ex-sound ninja interrupted, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the explosion happened. "He took Deidara and body flickered the hell out of here," she explained. "Are you telling me?" Onaki started, turning to look in the same direction once more. That Sato was there. He knew the answer already. Of course he was. If things had gone as he imagined them, then it was unlikely that the boy had enough time to get away. He could be wrong, for sure. The expressions on Sato's team spoke for themselves, however. Matatabi's chakra flowed through and out of her. The pressure of the chakra beast's presence weighing on everyone around her. She felt powerful, like every time she did this, which made it a shame that she couldn't use that power nearly enough. Most of the time, that is, because at that moment she still felt useless. The chakra beasts, despite being much more than the rampaging monsters most of the nations thought they were, still were hard to deal with at the best of times. Even in Kumo, where Jinchuriki were respected, they were also feared just because of the power they held. After all, just the fact that they were Jinchuriki already bumped them up in the power scale to Jounin level at the least. And yet, she'd been able to do next to nothing against Akatsuki. A glorified puppet breaker, that's what she'd been. Granted, she hadn't been able to do much, even when accessing Mitatabi's chakra. After all, if she let loose in that battlefield, she'd have affected her teammates too. Just the chakra poisoning would have taken them out of commission, most likely. Maybe it would have won them the battle faster, but if IG had instilled anything in her was that the safety of the team came first. For all the good it did to him, Yujito thought derisively. Thus, there she was, in a now familiar training grounds in Iwa, with her team, training. Business as usual, at that point. She'd fallen into that routine with frightening speed, if she was honest. It was sort of nice to have people working with her that were perfectly fine with what she was. Besides B-sensei, at least. They were kids, the lot of them, but they were still more. She guessed it had something to do with living through more than the average person. Even the dog had a story to tell. Through IG, of course, but the point stood. I think that's enough, she announced, when she noticed that Tamrai was having trouble keeping up. She guessed it made sense. Jirobo and Teiya had experienced the cursed mark, which she understood had similar side effects to chakra poisoning. Kabuto had been trained to withstand torture. And Yuki. That boy still intrigues me to no end. Mitatabi interrupted in Yujito's mind, the beast's voice a mix of frustration and curiosity. What was that about? Well, apparently, IG gave off the feeling of a Jinchuriki, which made no sense to either of the parts that made the two tails Jinchuriki. How was it possible? She'd have thought that Konoha had stolen a beast from somewhere, but it couldn't be. Not only was it impossible to do without someone knowing, but Mitatabi couldn't identify the chakra signature of the beast inside IG. Only thing the two tails could tell was that it vaguely resembled the eight tailses, but that was about it. Keep up, Bimbo, Teiya snarled with much more malice than usual. Yujito supposed she was frustrated and angry. The ex-Sound Kunoichi was certainly not one to control her emotions well, and it showed. I'm trying. Tamrai ground out, frustration clear in her voice and her expression. She looked a breath away from snapping at someone, anyone. Teiya wisely decided to keep her mouth shut, but the sneer in her face remained. That you can withstand chakra poisoning better doesn't mean you can keep going, Teiya Kabuto commented before Yujito could do so herself. The two of them seemed to be the only ones that remained unaffected. Outwardly, at least. It'd work against us if you let yourself be poisoned more than intended, the Jinchuriki added then. They had all agreed to train to withstand chakra poisoning, build resistance to it. All in the spirit of their ability to do so, or lack thereof, being a hindrance in the future. Yujito wondered about the merit of such training, considering that she was likely to be pulled back to Kumo soon, since the mission was essentially finished. Still, she went along with it. After all, who knew what the future held for them? We'd make more fucking progress if we didn't have to stop after a goddamn minute, wouldn't we? Teiya grumbled, more to herself than to them as Kabuto treated her. As much as he could, considering how tricky chakra poisoning was to deal with for Midnin. Building resistance to chakra poisoning is a slow progress. Trying to speed it up will only work against us, Yujito disagreed. She kept her tone civil though, because she understood that Teiya wasn't really angry at them, not even at Tamrai. She was frustrated, just like everyone else. Teiya, Jirobo said, his voice low and calm, or apparenting, at least. Shut up. The girl opened her mouth, probably to tell him just what she thought of his suggestion. However, it ended up clicking shut when Yuki barked at her. Only once, a short sound that could have meant anything, really. Only one that could have been able to tell what she was saying was Ig, but he wasn't around to do so then. Turned out they didn't need him for this though, because the Ninken followed that with a growl. Yujito had a hard time remembering the dog ever doing something like that, if she was honest. That probably added to the silence that followed it. Teiya deflated and settled on pulling out her flute and playing something. Doesn't feel the same, does it? Tamrai said then, making them all pause in what they were doing. She sounded like she was talking to herself, but her voice carried over just fine to the rest of them. At all she added, a grimace of a smile appearing on her face. The rest of them didn't reply, but they wore similar expressions. Yujito was fairly sure they were thinking the same thing too. The team without Ig was a completely different thing. It felt wrong. Oh. Onaki. He stood outside of a room with only a table in the middle. The piece of furniture was surrounded and covered with seals all over. There was only one other thing inside, and that was a cylindrical shape with a single word written on one of its ends. Sasori it read. Onaki stared at it through the one-way glass that separated him from what remained of the puppet master. Sato's team had made short work of the puppets that remained and Sasori himself. The Sushikage hadn't even had to help, really. For some reason though, the ex-spy, Yakushi, had decided to take the Akatsuki member alive. Or, as alive as Sasori was supposed to be, at least. Onaki couldn't fathom a reason for that. His first instinct was to think the boy had decided to betray them, but that didn't feel like the right answer, even if it sounded like the most likely. Many pieces didn't fit, really. After all, if Yakushi had turned against them earlier, it was likely that Akatsuki would have won the fight. Instead, he'd fought for them and helped them win. Was it because the Weaver had gone down and he seized his chance? That didn't make any sense. With such thoughts in his mind, Onaki had decided to take Sasori's core and put it somewhere so that it wouldn't cause any damage to his people. Meanwhile, he tried to make a decision regarding it, but he didn't feel any closer to one than the day the fight happened. If anything, he was more confused than before. With a sigh, Onaki turned and made his way through the corridors. His mind dwelled on the subject and many more that were happening at the moment. They might have won that fight, but there was much to be concerned about. He pondered on Akatsuki and what would happen now that they had taken out two of its members. Would they send another team? Would they back off for the moment? Would they send even more the next time? He pondered on Yakushi's actions and what they could mean and cause. Was the boy working against them? Did he have a plan for Sasori? Was Sato aware of what the boy would do? Was it his plan? And then, when his mind inevitably found itself drawn to the subject, he pondered on Ig Sato himself. What he'd accomplished and how he'd accomplished it. The boy had jumped to his death for Iwagakure and Iwagakure knew it. There was no way they wouldn't, considering that Dodara's explosion was seen from basically everywhere remotely close. Onaki had to send teams to deal with the aftermath of the explosion, both on site and in nearby towns that had witnessed the event. The redemption of the leaf, his people had taken to calling Ig Sato. Onaki really didn't know how to feel about that. On the bright side, however, at least he didn't have to put too much effort into letting Sato's team stay for longer inside the village. It seemed that the goodwill the boy had earned transferred to his squad too, which was a relief. Sashikage-sama, a voice greeted, and Onaki couldn't have stopped the frown that appeared on his face if he'd tried. There stood one of the dilemmas that plagued his mind. Kabuto Yakushi stood across from him, apparently going towards the same place he'd been intent on visiting. Yakushi, the Sashikage, all but growled. He wanted to put the boy in a cell and interrogate him until he told him why he'd done what he did. He really did. Unfortunately, he remembered very well how trying that worked with the boy back in Konoha when he'd been an enemy. He also couldn't trust a word of what came out of the boy's mouth either, which left him in quite a complicated situation. The boy smiled wryly, as if he knew exactly what Onaki was thinking. It wasn't hard to guess, the village leader supposed. "I apologize for the trouble, Sashikage-sama," the boy said then, bowing the smallest bit. "I know you won't believe it, but I think Sasori could be more useful alive." "And why would that be?" Onaki asked, seeing his escorts working on the edge of his sight. Evidently, they realized that this was a conversation better left private and hurried to keep it that way. "I'm afraid that you'll have to wait to know that," Yakushi replied, looking truly apologetic for once. "Honestly, I don't know about that myself, but I learned a few things from Ig. One of which is that anyone can be turned into an ally, if you go about it the right way." Onaki really wanted to disagree with those teachings, but how could he, when he was letting this spy walk around his village? When a Konoha ninja had saved his Jinchuriki and probably his life and his village. When the same Konoha ninja had helped train his granddaughter better than his own shinobi. "You win this time, Ig Sata," he grumbled in the privacy of his own mind. Outwardly, he just sighed. "He's annoying like that," yes, Yakushi agreed, which didn't make things better, if Onaki was honest. "At least I'm not the only one though," he decided, looking for a silver lining. "What's your team been doing?" he asked then, although, truly, he wasn't sure why. He knew the answer already, after all. He had his people keeping an eye on the team ever since they arrived to the village. If anything, he'd increased the vigilance on them after their main handler became unable to do his job. "We've been keeping up our training," mainly, Yakushi replied, although his smile told Onaki that he was very well aware of the fact that he knew that already. The Sashikage had to wonder though, if that was because he made an educated guess or because he saw the ninja that were watching them. "It's not the same, without Ig, but we are holding up." Both of them remained silent after that until, after a long moment, Yakushi spoke. "He'll pull through," he said, a confident smile on his face. "I don't believe he's human enough to die." It sounded to Onaki's ears like the words were said only half-jokingly. After giving it some thought though, he had to wonder how wrong the boy was, really. From everything he knew about Ig Sata. "I'm too old for this," he thought, massaging the bridge of his nose as he followed Yakushi inside the hospital. "Oh. Kumohoshi." Something had happened to Ig. She knew that, because neither her nor any of her spiders had heard of him in over a week now. Not even Shirakumo had gotten word of him, and that was even more concerning. Had something happened during his mission? Last they had heard, he'd grown tired of the Akatsuki toying with him and called for the clones he'd had training with Senjutsu. Ig can't have lost that battle, can he? Kumohoshi told herself as her 8 eyes took in her subordinates and their domain. Her mind was otherwise preoccupied though, unable to keep it away from their contractor. Ig Sata was the perfect summoner for them. Just like Gamabunta was sure Naruto Uzumaki was the Toad's, just like most snakes had believed Orochimaru was theirs, just like the White One had realized Anko Mitarashi was for her people, just like the slugs believed Tsunade Senju to be. Ig had made his way into the list of very privileged people to be suitable for a contract far above what most people could get. If anything more needed to be said, Kumohoshi would only point out that he was learning senjutsu at 14. And at a frightening rate to boot, if father and mother were to be believed. We certainly made the right choice, that day she mused, recalling that day when Ig Sato made his first appearance in their domain. Nothing yet. She heard Shirakumo ask, her daughter having approached her while she was distracted by her own mind. It's been a while already. Kumohoshi found herself almost amused by her daughter's behavior. She had no doubt that she'd try to act like nothing had happened when Ig returned. If he returns, she corrected herself. She hated that she had to do it. The Spider Chief wanted nothing more than to believe he would return for sure. However, in the world they lived in, there was no such thing as a guaranteed return. Especially from a mission like the one he'd been forced into. She really hoped he did though, if only so Shirakumo wouldn't lose a dear friend. Nothing yet, Hoshikumo confirmed solemnly. Her mood worsened when she saw her daughter basically wilting at the news. We just have to have faith in him, she told Shirakumo, carefully not actually telling her that he would be fine. Last thing she wanted to do was to lie to her daughter. He will be fine, Shirakumo said, obviously not having her mother's reservations. Still, Kumohoshi couldn't help but be happy that her daughter still had that in her, for however long the world let her. He's strong, he'll have defeated them. He is strong, the Spider Chief agreed. She could do that much, that was for sure. Maybe Ig wasn't the strongest, but if he could survive long enough, she had no doubts that he could be. It's just like back during the invasion, Shirakumo continued, sounding like she was trying to reassure herself more than anything. The idiot is probably stuck in a hospital again. That is a distinct possibility, yes, Kumohoshi nodded, slightly amused under the worry she was feeling. Guess we'll have to give him a piece of our mind if that's the case. I sure will, Shirakumo replied with a firm nod. A second later, she deflated. I hate that we couldn't help him, she mumbled then. If she was honest, Kumohoshi hated it too. However, they had been given a different job by their contractor. He'd left them working with his sensei, Anko, to look over Ig's family. Especially to look over Naruto Uzumaki, since there was quite the group after him. Kumohoshi hadn't liked that, at all, but she could understand why. Ig wouldn't be able to fight at his best if he was worrying about his brother. Furthermore, the pair that he was expected to face was dangerous for her and her people. Deidara, especially. One unfortunately placed and big enough explosion and even she could die, much as she hated to admit it. Young Sato is strong, she heard out of nowhere, which almost made her jump where she stood. Turning slightly, she saw father standing to her left. And our contractor will prove it, mother announced then, from the opposite side. If he dies, he will die in a way that everyone will remember, father continued then. If he lives, he will live in a way that everyone will be aware of. He's our contractor, the male elder said, starting to move forward. And he's a hunter, the female elder finished, following her partner. Sometimes I really don't understand them, Shirakumo mumbled once the two were gone. What was all that about? Kumohoshi chuckled to herself. Don't think too much about it, she told her daughter, looking at the elders as they moved further and further away. They are just as worried as us. That was their way of saying they were thinking about Ig too. Huh? Why complicate it like that? Shirakumo asked then. It's something that happens as you grow older, Kumohoshi replied, withholding her amusement. A part of her couldn't help but wonder though, if there was more to the elder's speech than they could understand. It wouldn't be the first time and it wouldn't be the last. Her daughter hummed for a moment, sounding thoughtful. Mum. Yes? She asked, curious of what was in the young one's mind. Can we train together today? I want to get stronger, Shirakumo said, determination coloring her voice. I hate feeling like I can't help. Then, I will train you. Kumohoshi nodded, proud. I'm sure IG will be proud, she added then, and if she could smirk, she would have. I don't care about that. Shirakumo protested adamantly. Something that was ruined immediately after when she mumbled /asked. Do you think so? Quite, the chief spider replied, withholding her amusement. It seemed that their contractor couldn't do anything without earning people's respect and admiration. She wondered how Iwa was faring against that power of his. Now, let's start with genjutsu dissipation. Shirakumo stumbled on her own legs. Do we have to? We can start with poison techniques instead. Kumohoshi pretended to be thoughtful. No, we are starting with genjutsu dissipation, let's go. But Oh. IG Sata. That was close, he thought to himself as he looked at the mirror Kabuto had passed him. His reflection was strange, even if it was mostly the same he'd always seen. The scar Killer Bee had left behind over his right eye was a lot smaller, for one. Faded, in a way. That was as much as World Ender could do with a pre-existing mark, it seemed. The lines on his arm were barely white threads strewn on his skin at that point. The thing that caught his attention was his hair though. The left side of his head was all but bald now, because, apparently, World Ender didn't help regenerate hair. At least the top part wasn't too damaged to make me look stupid, he thought, grimacing internally. Still, I'll probably have to cut it really short to make it look decent, or maybe I can style it with this in mind. Questions. Then he sighed. What did he really care what he looked like, honestly? Taking a deep breath in, he passed his fingers through what remained of his hair and closed his eyes. How are things with the team? IG asked Kabuto, who was currently moving his fingers through his body, looking for anomalies and such. Apparently, Sasori's poison was persistent enough to still be around. On top of that, Sachigumo had to let go of World Ender a few days after the fight, on Kiji's and Hakai's insistence. She could only give so much chakra, after all. Fortunately, she'd held on enough that the toxins weren't about to kill him anymore. Having a mednin like Kabuto helping out certainly wasn't a bad thing. Also, while his regenerative jutsu was a wonderful thing, it didn't quite mean that he'd come unscathed from Dodara's explosion. He'd managed a single flicker away from where the bomb had gone off, but he'd still been caught inside its range. Fortunately, he had also managed to cover himself with new Iberi's wire, which was why he'd come out alive at all. Even with all that, IG had suffered serious damages. So much so that World Ender had barely managed to keep him together long enough to be taken to the hospital. Now, more than a week later, he'd just woken up and he still needed to stay in his room, looked over every so often to check that the poison wasn't screwing him over unexpectedly or that his bones weren't fragile enough to break from the slightest of motions. Overall, it wasn't all that good, but they'd won the battle, and that's what was important. That and the quest rewards, he mused, looking at the screen that he couldn't bring himself to dismiss. Quest complete, defeat Dodara and Sasori. Rewards. +2 to all stats. +10 levels to fire resistance. +10 levels to poison resistance. Plus title unlocked, Redemption of the Leaf. Plus title updated, The Weaver. Still think it's weird that I got fire resistance from Deidara when explosion release is actually a combination of earth and lightning IG mused to himself. Besides that little nitpick though, the rest of it was all good, great even. IG Sata. Main title, Anko Mitarashi's Apprentice. Secondary title, Prodigy. Energy points, 1140/1140. Chakra points, 1475/1475. Natural energy points, 0/1475. Beast chakra points, 0/0. Strength, 57. Dexterity, 59. Constitution, 57. Chakra, 57. Chakra control, a. Especially considering that my stats are kind of stuck as of late, he thought as he looked over his status screen. He'd switched back to his training titles as soon as he woke up, intent on trying to level up his poison resistance faster to get out of the hospital. Anko's apprentice title especially, since it sped up poison-related skills more than his general experience buffs. Redemption of the Leaf, he mused then with a grimace. He didn't know quite how to feel about that title, really. After all, Redemption of the Leaf increases stats when fighting in and for the Land of Earth by 30%. Increases skill efficiency when fighting in and for the Land of Earth by 25%. It's a little late for that, isn't it? IG grumbled to himself. He could have really used that before the fight. As it was, he could only hope it would come in handy at some point, because if not it would feel like his system was mocking him. The most unexpected part of the rewards was the title update though. However, after some thought, he guessed it made sense. A title was something he was known for. If he did something to put more meaning behind a name, then it stood to reason that it would get better, right? That was the theory he was running with, at least. The Weaver increases stats when fighting alongside members of the Spider Clan by 15%. Increases stats when fighting with New Ivory by 30%. Increases the effects of Bloodlust when using threads by 25%. Increases the effects of thread-based techniques by 25%. Not only had the update raised the percentage increase when fighting with New Ivory, but it had added a completely new buff to his thread techniques, which was great. Maybe I can look into making new ones for those. Lots of project ideas now, he mused as he leaned back on his bed. You should be getting out of here in a week, at most, Kabuto informed him after he finished his inspection. We shouldn't leave for Konoha for another week more on top of that. You won't be in any condition for a trip like that before that, at the least, he explained, stressing the last part as if he would argue against that. If we can stay, I don't see why we wouldn't, IG replied with a shrug that made him grimace slightly. Everything felt tense, stiff, uncomfortable. I could use some time to rest, not gonna lie. Good, Kabuto sighed, nodding and turning to note something on a clipboard. I'll go back to check that Tamrai and Teiya don't kill each other. Kabuto IG called, freezing the ex-spy where he was, on his way to the door. Thanks for coming, you didn't have to, and I appreciate that, he told him. Just doing my job as the team's medic, Kabuto waved off, earning an amused smile from IG. As if he would believe it was just that. Tell the others that they did a good job and to continue training, IG added then, looking out the window of his room. And that they are great too. Will do, his team member said before leaving for real this time. Overall, IG thought the mission had gone as well as it could have. Sata, he heard then, turning to see Onaki entering the room. It was the first time he saw the old man since the battle, actually. We have much to talk about. No rest for the wicked, IG thought to himself as he gave the old man a half-smile that held no amusement. You need better control, Princess, IG called from where he sat, off to the side of where the spa was going on at the moment. He'd been let out of the hospital the day before, and things were back to normal-ish. He couldn't do much by himself, sadly. He couldn't even walk long distances without Kabuto getting on his case, so he spent most of the time sitting. Not that it really mattered, all things considered. While he couldn't use strong jutsu either, living thread was perfectly within his capabilities at the moment. At least if he didn't push it too far with those. Using those as his pseudo-limbs if he needed to get something, he was confident that he wouldn't go insane while he continued recovering. Jirobo, use more than just your body. I know you can use jutsu, so do it, he said then. His commands were said in his normal voice, no shouting or anything of the sort. They could hear him, he knew, and if they couldn't then it was their problem, not his. Besides, it added another layer of training, which was perfectly fine in his opinion. They might hate him for it, but they'd do so anyway. Kabuto, healing and supporting is all well and good, but sometimes you have to attack too, he reminded the Mednin, who gave a quick nod, before charging. Or faking a charge, as it seemed, because he went to help Jirobo instead. Then he actually ran forward. Good, IG thought. After all, if he'd done as he instructed instantly, it'd be stupid. It would have given him away. Relaxing a little, he leaned back against the rock behind him. It wasn't the most comfortable thing ever, but Jirobo had shaped it a little. It was still rock, but at least it had roughly the shape necessary to lean against it and not have his back complaining about it too much. He closed his eyes and focused solely on Taeya's music. He was still baffled by the girl. How she'd managed to merge two things as complex as music and genjutsu so that both worked perfectly, he had no idea. He offered no small amount of compliments in regards to that, because she honestly deserved them. Tired already, fearless leader? Taeya asked, and IG noticed that her music didn't stop, for some reason. If he had to guess, she'd placed him in a genjutsu to keep hearing it. Or her voice had been the illusion, either or, really. He almost chuckled at the new nickname she'd given him. Apparently, his actions during the battle against the Akatsuki had guaranteed a change. He wasn't sure why, but it amused him to no end. Maybe a hint of a memory somewhere in his mind from his last life. It was as good a guess as any. Maybe it was the fact that it could almost be mistaken as a compliment that amused him, considering that all her nicknames were rather insulting. Just enjoying the peace while it lasts, he said, a slight smile forming on his face. If I know my luck, something will happen soon. Either before we leave Iwa or when we arrive at Konoha, he continued. So, I'll just make sure to make the most of this. Real positive there, the girl chuckled, but he could hear it in her voice, that she wasn't as dismissive as her words made it seem. Remember what we talked about before arriving at Iwa? He asked all of a sudden. She didn't reply instantly, which he supposed meant he'd surprised her, even if she didn't stop playing. Yes. Taeya replied, almost sounding unsure. He had a hunch that she knew exactly what he was talking about. He'd let her get away with playing dumb though. I'll do as I said, he told her with a half smile. I'll pull all the strings I need to. You guys, you are my team now. I'll need your help with my missions, with training, with lots of things. I know we are awesome, fearless leader Taeya replied, and he could tell she was trying to act like normal. She failed, evidently. You don't have to explain it to me. Especially me, since I'm the best. Sure, he agreed with a chuckle. Just for your music you are the best, he praised, as he normally did. You guys will continue to be my team. Not until we deal with Akatsuki, but for as long as you wish. I'll make sure you are given a chance to make things right. For a long moment, the two of them sat there in silence. Only the music was heard and IG wondered if the spa had ended or Taeya was hiding that behind a genjutsu. If it was the latter, he was grateful. So, do we have a team name? She asked eventually, and he could hear the grin on her face. He rolled his eyes without even opening them. Yeah, Suicide Squad, he answered. If all missions are like this one, I'd say it's appropriate, Taeya replied, as if he'd been serious. It has a nice ring to it. I like it. Now that name's gonna stick, isn't it? IG thought, unsure of how to feel about that. In the end, he just shrugged. At least she was happy and wasn't cursing up a storm. Did she stop playing? He wondered, before he heard her again. Fearless leader, Bimbo number 1 and Bimbo number 2 want to talk to you, Taeya announced, and he sighed. At least she's not that afraid of Yujito anymore, he mused. And they are too fucking scared to call you themselves, might I add. Thanks, Taeya, your help is appreciated, he said, giving her a look through the corner of his eye. She nodded seriously, but he could see the corner of her lips twitching up. So, I'm guessing you guys want to discuss the spa? He asked the two blondes in front of him, who nodded. Let's get on with this then. Oh. I mean, the body isn't made to withstand so many boosts, IG commented from where he sat, a notebook in his hands. The team was sitting down and simply going over strategy, training ideas and technique ideas. He was currently working on two things himself. A fire release jutsu and 1 or 2 thread-based ones, since he had such a buff to them with his title now. His comment, though, was directed at Taeya and Kabuto, who were going over what they'd used with Tamrai against Akatsuki. Apparently, the poor girl hadn't taken both techniques at once well. They were currently brainstorming how to make that combination better for the target. IG was actually surprised that Kabuto hadn't realized the problem and the solution. You have to add something to increase how much the body can handle. Alternatively, regeneration so that the target will feel the strain but recover quickly, he explained, when both of them turned towards him. Instantly, he saw Kabuto's eyes narrow. That's how your regeneration works, right? I thought it was 2 techniques at once. A power-up and healing, but it's 2 in 1, huh? The ex-spy noted, the cogs turning in his head. I see, he added, a smile that would unnerve many people forming on his face. So, you are the medic here. You got a solution, 4 eyes? Taeya asked with a raised eyebrow. IG simply sighed, shook his head, and turned back to what he was doing. There was much work to do, and since he couldn't actually train at that moment, he thought it would be better to take advantage of that fact. Thus, he focused simply on studying and working on theory projects like new jutsu. He paused though and clicked his tongue. Are you going to pretend to ignore me for much longer? He asked, his eyes turning to the side. There, on his shoulder, rode Shirakumo. He'd sent a message to the Spider Clan as soon as he'd managed, and the response he got was the small white spider. The little princess had also, apparently, been quite put off by his time of silence, even if it wasn't his fault. Thus, she wouldn't leave his side, but also wouldn't talk to him. "I don't talk to idiots," the spider muttered, and he almost laughed. That wouldn't do him any favors, so IG resolved to keep that to himself. "I was worried," she mumbled, and he almost didn't catch it, despite the fact that she was talking basically next to his ear. "I know you were, Shira-chan," he replied with a sad smile. "But I couldn't have you here. You could have died, your mother could have died if you guys were here," he explained, setting down the notebook and taking a hold of the spider to pull her in front of him. The little one gave token resistance, but that was about it. "I know you understand that, so, please, can we stop this?" "I'm sorry, okay. For what it's worth, I'm sorry that you were worried, but I wouldn't do anything differently." "Then don't apologize, idiot," she told him, although he wasn't sure if she was annoyed or just sad. "Can you put me down? I'm not angry anymore." The way she said that last part more as a question than a statement had him doubting, but he did as she said anyway. "I'm happy to have you here, Shira," he told her with a small smile as she climbed her way to his shoulder once more. "I'm happy to be here too, IG," she replied, and he could almost picture a tiny grin in her voice. "I've been training with the clan," she added out of nowhere, surprising him somewhat. "Oh. Yeah, especially with Mom," she continued, and he could tell she was getting excited. "That excitement died a quick death though. She keeps making me train with genjutsu though." He chuckled at that. "Well, it is your weakest," IG reasoned, although he knew she knew that already. Still, the spider huffed at him. "I know that," she protested, proving him right. "It's just so frustrating. Anyway, just you wait. Next time, I'll be ready to help too. I don't want to be left to the sidelines again," she resolved. He had to be careful not to show anything on his face. It was unlikely she would be ready for the next time he'd have a fight like that. Very much so, actually. Hell, it was unlikely that Kumohoshi would be able to join. Maybe against Kakuzu and Haiden, but Pain, Kanon, Itakai, Kai's aim. Hell no. The spiders weren't going anywhere near those. He wasn't even sure about those first two, if he was honest. Chances were he'd leave them out of that just in case. "Ah, she's so cute," Taeyar exclaimed mockingly. "You didn't tell me about this cutie, fearless leader." Predictably, the spider started protesting that accusation vehemently. IG, for his part, looked at his genjutsu expert and saw the glint in her eyes. She was doing that on purpose. IG made a mental note to do something nice for her. He wasn't sure what, but there had to be something. New flute. Clothes. Genjutsu training /ideas. He mused, before putting a pin on it. "Say, Taeyar, can you look after Shirakumo? I'm sure she'll love to spend time with you," he asked, earning a positively mean smile from the girl that spelled nothing good for the small, white arachnid. IG dutifully ignored his poor summons please. Unfortunately, he had something to do, and he was pretty sure that bringing her with him wouldn't be appreciated. "Everyone, don't destroy the training grounds while I'm gone, yeah?" he added, looking around the rest of them. He blinked when he saw both Yuki and Jirobo with their eyes narrowed at Yujito. For a moment, he considered asking what was going on there. It wasn't to be though, because a pair of ninja appeared on a side of the clearing, just like he'd sensed with his threads. "IG Sata, the Sushikage called for your presence," one of them said, and IG was still somewhat surprised by the fact that there was no hostility hidden anywhere in his tone. Despite his new title and what he'd been experiencing since he woke up, he still couldn't quite believe it. "Ig Kabuto called," a stern expression on his face. "Be careful, all right? You aren't 100% recovered yet." "I know," that the boy acknowledged with a nod, before waving his concerns off. "I'll keep it in mind and I'll try my best," he replied, carefully not saying that he would actually hold back or anything of the sort. If the annoyed expression on the boy's face was anything to go by, he noticed. "Lead the way," he said to the I-1 in, preparing himself for what was to come. "Oh. Are you sure about this?" "Onaki, the Sushikage?" asked Ig, which felt all sorts of wrong. Honestly, when had he become the kind of person that was in these situations? "When you were put in this world," Kage offered, and Ig could almost hear the smirk on his face. Maybe he was projecting it, or maybe the boy just knew him that well, he supposed. As for his point, "When you decided to make friends in high places and go far in the world," Hakai suggested then, making him grimace. The woman had a point though, maybe if he'd tried to be average. "You'd never have been average, Ig. No matter what path you took," she said, and he thought he got a hint of pity in her tone. "I should have been a civilian," he thought to himself and his companions. Sachigumo simply offered him a wave of comfort, which he appreciated. "I feel like I should be the one to ask that, you know," Ig replied out loud to the village leader, a wry smile on his face. The grimace on the old man's face told him that he also knew the situation was unusual at best. "Indeed. You have a good track record, but I have to say, I don't like this. However, I'll allow it," the man said with a sigh and a stiff nod. "Now, let's get on with it so we can continue with our lives, okay? Oh, meeting with the princess soon, huh?" Ig noted with a slight smile that widened when he saw the denial on the man's face. "No way you are actually eager to get back to paperwork, old man," he added, seeing the Sushikage's expression sour. "I think I preferred it when you called me Sushikage-sama," Onaki grumbled. "I find that nearly dying again really showed me that I worried too much," Ig mused out loud with a lazy smirk. "Also, I think I earned enough goodwill to do that much, don't you?" "Do you think just anyone can call me that?" the village leader asked with a raised eyebrow. "No, not really," he agreed with a nod, before sending the old man an amused expression. "But you wouldn't be talking with just anyone either, would you?" To that, the Sushikage sighed. "Anyway," Ig continued then, "I want to get this done too, honestly. So." With that said, he opened the door in front of him and entered. His smile vanished, replaced with a blank expression as he walked in. Calmly he made his way to the only chair in the room and sat down. Then, Ig took a look at the piece of paper on top of a small pile and the pencil that were laid in front of him on a table. "No" was written there. Short and simple. A single word that gave him all the answers he could need. Then, his red eyes moved up and he stared at the other person in the room. "Well, there was an easy way and a hard way," Ig mused out loud as he leaned back on his chair. "Sachigumo," he called mentally, receiving an almost eager bark in response. "And we'll have to do this the easy way," he added with a smile on his face as he went through hand seals. "Yin release, wits end has gone up a level. Then he waited. "How long do you think it'll take?" he mused to his mental companions. "A minute, tops," was Kage's guess. "Half that," Hakai said, humming. Sachigumo barked, although she wasn't making a guess or anything, simply wanting to join the conversation. That's just what she was, cute. And a little ball of overpowered and barely controlled chakra, but mainly cute. So, how about now, huh? He asked, as he deactivated the jutsu after a long moment. Around 10 seconds, although he hadn't been counting, really. Internally, he felt his body protesting what he was doing. Kabuto did warn me, he mused with an inward grimace. Outwardly, he had to keep looking like he was perfectly fine. In front of him, the pencil moved, raising and writing on the notebook. It shook a lot, IG noticed. The words that it produced were barely legible compared to the perfect letters of the first word he'd read in the notebook. Then again, wit's end had that effect on everyone. What do you want? It wrote. Well, Sasori, he started, tilting his head slightly and smiling at the cylinder that contained the remaining humanity of the Akatsuki member. First, I want all the information you have on Akatsuki. There was a moment of pause, in which nothing happened. Then the pencil moved again, this time a little more firmly. The shake was passing, but there was a certain hesitance to its motions. IG picked up on it easily. How could he not, when it was basically the only thing that he could look at? That, and the words being written on the paper sheets. It wrote slowly, at first, like it was dragging the words along. Steadily though, the speed increased. More and more words appeared and IG felt his lazy smile turn into a feral grin. Instead of an answer, Sasori started writing down information. Every Akatsuki member, not only what they could do, but everything the puppet master knew about them. Backgrounds, personalities, descriptions, everything was in the notes the man wrote down. There were old missions the organization had been part of, some of them not quite so old. There were even prospective missions for the future. IG would have to share those as soon as possible. Before anything else was said, he wrote down said tasks separately and stood up. After passing the sheet he'd written out to a ninja that waited outside the door, he moved to sit back on the chair. Taking a moment to gather his thoughts, he went for honesty. Not gonna lie, I thought it would be harder than that, IG said as he read over the notes again, confirming to himself as much as he could from what he already knew. From what he could tell, it was all true. The pencil moved again. I won't risk that. There the pencil paused and started shaking once more. What was that? Sasori asked in the end. That is my personal brand of hell, IG replied, almost proud. Maybe that made him a bad person, he supposed. However, the void genjutsu had done wonders for him. They'd helped him so much that he was hard-pressed to feel bad about using them. Sasori seemed to wait for a moment more, probably expecting more of an explanation. IG wasn't going to reveal more than that though, especially not with Onaki, and who knew who else was watching from outside. Thus, they remained unmoving for a long moment before the puppet master wrote something else. You said information was only the first thing, he wrote, the pencil twitching in a few places there, but he seemed to be recovering from the void already. At least, from what IG could see. Still, the boy smiled. I was waiting for you to mention that, he commented, shifting his position to something more comfortable. You saw my team. I want you to be part of it, he said bluntly. He could try and say more, offer arguments, pros and cons, and really give a sales pitch. However, he didn't feel like doing that. Sasori was a smart man. Surely he could come up with those by himself. So, leaving it at that, IG simply waited and observed. The pencil seemed frozen in place, floating over the paper sheet. Then, after some time passed, the tool seemed to move to right before hesitating. It did so several times, each time pausing before Sasori could communicate anything. Eventually, it managed to do so. On the sheet, the puppet master started writing a list. Wood, metal, wire, tools, senbon, plants, venoms, and so on. The more he read, the more Iji's grin widened. He knew exactly what it meant. He directed a smug expression towards where he knew Onaki was looking at them. He could almost see the annoyed expression on the man's face. When Sasori finally stopped writing, Iji addressed him again. Well, you'll have to wait until we leave Iwa, as I'm sure you'll understand, he told the puppet master. I'll see about this and maybe some more. For the moment, welcome to the Suicide Squad, Sasori, he said, almost chuckling at using that name. For a moment, Iji thought that would be it. However, as he went to stand up, the pencil moved once again. I have many questions, he read before chuckling to himself and shaking his head. I'd be more surprised if you didn't, he admitted, moving towards the door. You'll have answers, if I can and want to give them. So, for the moment, you'll have to wait on that too. And with that, he left the room. I really hope you know what you are doing, Onaki said, eyes narrowed and still staring at the cylinder that was Sasori at the moment. If this blows up on our faces. It won't, and if it does, it'll be solely on me, Iji reassured, passing him the list that Sasori had given. I'll take him away with me anyway. So, unless we have to come back here, you and your people will be fine. Besides, I have no doubts you can take on Sasori, especially after he lost most of his puppets, including his strongest ones. I'll get all this ready for when you have to leave, Onaki told him as he read over the list, his eye twitching at some of those things. Iji understood, especially the ones related to poison. Those, in the hands of someone like Sasori, were a very dangerous thing. If Iji were less confident in the fear the void could strike in a person and of his chances of taking out Sasori by himself, then he wouldn't even consider doing this. I'd appreciate that, Iji replied with a nod. Then, he sighed, feeling his hands start to shake. If you'll excuse me, I'll go back to my team, he added, trying to act like everything was fine. You take him to the training grounds, Onaki barked at one of the guards. Evidently, Iji hadn't hidden his weakness as well as he hoped, or maybe the Sushikage already had suspicions and was just guessing. Regardless, the boy was grateful for the assist. Thanks, he said with a slight smile. We should be the ones thanking you, boy, Onaki shot back, shaking his head. Iji noted that none of the ninja present so much as twitched at those words. No signs of opposition at all. Ha, interesting, he noted. Then, one of them put a hand on his shoulder and shinned him away. Kabuto isn't gonna be happy with me, Iji mused, grimacing. He was very glad that the Mednin was still somewhat afraid of him, otherwise he'd look forward to his annoyance even less. Maybe you'll take your orders to rest more seriously then, Hakai pointed out unnecessarily. Oh, shut up, Iji barked at her. Then, as he appeared right outside the training grounds, he saw an angry Kabuto and a very amused team waiting for him. Of course, he thought resignedly. Welcome back, fearless leader Tilda, we've been waiting for you, Tilda Teiya said with a singing voice. For once, Tumrai seemed in agreement with her, because she giggled behind her hand. Iji, just come and sit somewhere. I'll check to see if everything's still all right, Kabuto ordered, for once not showing a single sign of hesitance when interacting with him. I kinda hope he did, Iji lamented as he did what he was told. Just wait until I'm ready to train you myself again, guys, he called over his shoulder, and the laughing stopped. Because you can be sure I'll remember this. We keep telling you, you need more control, Tumrai said, slightly annoyed. You have lots of power, but you have little to no control over it, she explained for what felt like the 100th time. I know that, but it's easier said than done, Kurotsuchi replied with a groan, massaging her head. Ig simply sat to the side as the girls talked. Really, they had it handled. The 4 girls of his team could really get things done when they wanted to, he'd found. That sounds like quitter talk. Maybe I should call you that instead of, Princess Teiya commented, feigning disinterest rather well. Ig, for his part, had to suppress a smile at the way Kurotsuchi's brow twitched at the nickname. It seemed that she had been put into the group for the nice-sounding but equally insulting nicknames, just like he had. The redhead had realized pretty quick that the I1 hated being called that, and had taken to doing so every chance she got. It is doable, just because it's hard doesn't mean you can ignore it, Yujito said, adding her opinion to the mix, making Kurotsuchi deflate. Really, half their time training had been spent trying to get the girl to train on that part, but she just... I've been trying, okay. She admitted, getting a blink from everyone. No way that was true. None of them had noticed any changes in her style of fighting since they started. Well, none that would signal some work being put into control, that is. It just... I can't improve my control. That can't be, Ig said, joining the conversation for the first time. How have you been going at it? I've done everything you guys told me. I've been training by myself, doing everything I can to get at least some control over my lava, but I just can't. From weaker attacks to strong ones. From slowly using them to trying to get some instinctive feeling. And nothing, Kurotsuchi explained, making the 4 of them frown. That was strange. What techniques have you worked on? How long? Have you talked with your grandfather? Ig shot then, closing his eyes to better concentrate. That, and to consult with Hakai and Kij too. Strange, Hakai mused, although it seemed to be mostly to herself. No progress whatsoever is very strange indeed. Especially since she's tried several approaches. There must be one that hasn't been tried yet, Kij added then. I haven't talked with him yet, Kurotsuchi replied nervously, fidgeting from what he got from WebSense. I'd like to work things out without his help, really. Pride, of course. How very fitting for you, Princess Teiya pointed out, which almost made the girl flinch. Teiya, enough. Say something helpful or wait until we are done here, Ig told her, which made her mouth click shut. As for the other questions, he listened then, how the girl listed all the jutsu she'd tried to work with to gain more control, how and for how long. She'd tried everything, from a technique that shot a small ball of lava to her strongest technique, and nothing seemed to work. There had to be something they were missing though. He'd seen her use lots of jutsu since she joined their training, there had to be. Then he blinked. What about that one you used during the tune-in exams? The one you used during the preliminaries, I mean, Ig asked, recalling how she'd used a technique to immobilize Neji. It had been lava release, but it hadn't actually been lava, he was pretty sure. The quicklime congealing technique? Kurotsuchi asked, frowning. That technique works fine as is. I don't even need to add control to that. It's not even lava. But it is lava release, right? Ig pressed, the idea having ingrained itself in his mind. It is, she admitted with a slow nod, as her expression turned thoughtful. Do you think I should try with that technique? Would that even help with my lava? It's lava release, so it must be connected somehow. It might give you some insight on what to work with for your other jutsu, he theorized. Can't hurt to try, right? He added with a slight smile as he saw her processing the idea and nodding again. Guess I'll try with that, she replied, her eyes unfocusing as her mind got started thinking how to go about her new training. Well, hopefully you'll have something to show us the next time we see you, Ig told her with a grin. He couldn't quite keep it happy though. We are going back to Konoha soon, so we'll likely not see much else from your progress for a while, he added when she looked at him confused. It seemed she'd forgotten that they had only been there for the mission. I see, she said, looking down. Ah, Princess will miss us. Taeya exclaimed, pulling the girl into a hug. Certainly not you, let me go. Kurotsuchi protested, trying to get the redhead off of her. The sight only made Ige's grin widened. When she finally managed to push Taeya away, she straightened her clothes and her hair. Besides, chances are that you'll receive more missions from here. No way Iwa will just ignore the redemption of the leaf, she added, relishing the groan that escaped Ig. I'm sure there'll be people asking for you to do missions here at some point. Guess you won't get away from training with us, then, he commented, drawing a smile from the girl that he returned. That means you have to get some actual progress going or we'll leave you behind, you know. I know, Kurotsuchi muttered, which surprised him. He'd expected her to grow annoyed or display some confidence. Hey, no need to be like that. I'm sure you'll keep up, Ig reassured before giving it some thought. Maybe I can send some spiders with messages and the like. There must be someone that specializes in that. Oh, going to start sending letters to your forbidden love, fearless leader? Taeya teased, making Ig facepalm and Kurotsuchi blush. Sometimes I wonder why I put up with you, he grumbled. Same Rai, Yujito and Kurotsuchi shot back instantly. The redhead herself simply cackled, apparently having the time of her life. Oh. I still can't believe it was you. The girl next to him exclaimed, not for the first time. Ig chuckled to himself as he looked through the drawings in the notebook she had given him. Well, you better start believing or you'll be shouting that when I come to say goodbye, he told her, his face twitching as the girl's expression fell. Sometimes I'm an idiot. Only sometimes. Kij commented but was quickly silenced by his sister Hakai giving him a smack. Thanks. Don't mention it, Ig, she replied, and he had the suspicion that she just enjoyed having a reason to hit Kij. Which was fair, he could certainly understand that. I hate both of you, Kij grumbled, earning a bark from Sachigumo that went along the lines of no, you don't. Ig almost laughed out loud at that. Well, you are already getting better, he said then, trying to cheer up the girl in front of him. I'm sure you'll be better than me in no time at all. You think so? She asked then, slightly subdued. In turn, he smiled kindly at her. I know so, he replied, looking at the notebook. You know what? I'll give you a bunch of my drawings. And I want you to draw a whole lot, okay? I'll come back eventually and I want you to be much better, yeah? You promise? The girl said, eyes shining with tears. He simply put a hand on her head and shuffled her orange hair. I promise, he told her. Itsuka was one of the people he'd interacted with the most with his clones. So much so, that he couldn't stop himself from approaching her now that he didn't need to be covert anymore. That, and he wasn't glared or sneered at anymore, so that was a plus. There was the occasional one that still held a grudge, but they were the weird ones out, really. Other people even spoke up against such people. It was actually a bit weird for IG, if he was honest. I'll be better than you, the girl said then, looking down at her notebook with a small smile. Her eyes darted towards him a few times and IG realized that she was expecting him to shoot that idea down. He wasn't sure why though, since that was exactly what he'd been telling her so far, but she seemed to have some self-esteem problems. Probably what had made her be completely okay approaching a stranger. I'm sure you will, he said instead, giving her an encouraging smile. I look forward to seeing your drawings even more then. Itsuka called the girl's mother, who paused for a moment as she saw him. Oh, IG, still adamant on teaching her, huh? The woman asked kindly, smiling at the both of them. Of course, she's amazing as it is. This way I'll be able to tell everyone that I taught her, Iji replied with a grin as both mother and daughter giggled. Honestly, how could I pass up those bragging rights? You are a great ninja though, everyone says so, Itsuka pointed out, still laughing. I just draw. No, nothing just about drawing, I'll have you know, IG shook his head vehemently. Besides, then I'll be able to brag about both things anyway. It's still a win, he said, shuffling her hair once more. IG tilde, she whined, patting her own head trying to fix the mess he'd made. Stop doing that. Never, he replied with a chuckle as she pouted at him. Oh. Good job, Jirobo. Keep it up. IG called from the sidelines. Currently, the ex-Sound Nin was participating in a 1 versus 2 against Kabuto and Tamrai and winning. How? Well, first of all, the guy was much better than one would expect. However, the same could be said about the other two. The trick here was that they were using only Taijutsu, or, in Tamrai's case, only able to use her fan in its closed state. It was a glorified club used like that, but it was how she fought in close quarters, so he'd allowed it. He'd have her practice actual Taijutsu with Teiya later on. Then again, maybe she wouldn't stick around once they made it back to Konoha. He'd have to talk with her and Gaara. They'd achieved what they wanted. He'd gotten a person with a good head on their shoulders and that he could somewhat trust while he led a team of what had been potential threats. And Tamrai had gotten some goodwill for her people after the invasion. Both of those things were resolved now though. He could trust his team at least as much as he could normal ninja from Konoha, if not more. It was weird, to think about it, but he'd lived with these people for a while. He'd observed them, interacted with them, trained with them. He'd thought he was being naive, but Hakai and Kij had agreed with him on that, and that reassured him quite a bit. There was Sasori, of course, but he was confident that he could take him out. He'd also gotten Kabuto to focus on his antidote skills, even working with him to help him improve. That together with the list of ingredients that they were providing the puppet master should be enough to be covered in case the ex-Akatsuki member went rogue on them. As for Tamrai, she could probably continue to get her people even more on everyone's good side, however, it wasn't really worth risking one's life for that anymore. She could back out now and she wouldn't be losing anything. She could now go back to her country, her village and her family. He wouldn't even blame her, really. He was kind of expecting her to do just that, if he was honest. Teiya will fill her place quite well, Hakai commented with a hum. Especially since she's getting better with her genjutsu. Now she can give orders while still using her flute. Kabuto isn't that far behind either, Kij pointed out. He can lead just fine in a pinch. I guess you guys are right, IG acknowledged. It didn't mean he had to like it though. He'd miss her. I grow entirely too attached to people. Yeah, Kij agreed instantly and without mercy whatsoever. To be fair, you have good reason to, considering what you've gone through, Hakai added after her counterpart's words. Now, with Damrai and Yujito probably leaving, his team would feel so much smaller. Not necessarily that much weaker, considering Sasori, but they would certainly feel that loss. It is what it is, he mused after taking a deep breath in. I'll have to visit or something, I guess. I'm sure Gaara would appreciate that, not so much for a but who cares about that guy. Oh. Finally Onaki grumbled, making Ig chuckle. They were all standing right on the outer wall of Iwagakure. The team was leaving for Konoha, just like it had been decided. He wasn't precisely in perfect conditions, but Kabuto had said he could travel just fine, so long as that was the only thing he did and he didn't overexert himself. Iwa would have let them stay for longer, after the disaster they'd prevented. Even Onaki, complaining the whole time as he'd been, wouldn't have really cared. However, Ig himself wanted to leave already. He wanted to see his brothers and sisters once more. He wanted to see his village again. He wanted to truly be able to relax at home. You do know you aren't fooling anyone, right? The boy pointed out with an amused grin. Refusing to deign that with a response, Onaki simply glared at him. Next to the man, Kurotsuchi tried and failed to contain a giggle. She didn't put too much effort into it though, Ig was sure. Anyway, it was actually nice to be here, he said, giving the two of them a smile. I'd expected to have a much harder time here, I'm glad I was wrong. Once this whole mess is over, if you guys send any missions, I'll be sure to take one once in a while. He was sure they wouldn't, and if they did, Onaki would make sure it was something irrelevant just for politics and the like. After all, there was no way Iwa would ask for another village's help without stakes as high as the ones they had right now. That and a lot of political reasons too. A repeat of the situation they were in was unlikely, unless Akatsuki sent another pair to them. On second thought, Ig wasn't so sure it was that unlikely. Let's hope I don't actually need to call for your help again, shall we? Onaki said. Need, huh? Ig noticed. So, he also realizes it's possible it might happen, huh? Just give me a call and I'll rush back here, Ig replied with a smile on his face, despite the concerning thoughts in his mind. I still have to make a decent ninja out of the princess here. What? Kurotsuchi's mirth vanished instantly, replaced by irritation. At least I'll have something to look forward to if that's the case then, Onaki said then, interrupting his granddaughter and surprising Ig. He hadn't expected the man to go along with it. He'd half expected a rebuke or something. You are not so bad, old man, Ig commented, drawing a frown from the Sushikage. Well, I think that's enough beating around the bush. I'm sure we'll see each other at some point. Do try not to get killed on the way to Konoha, will you, brat? Onaki replied, making the boy chuckle. I'll do my best. Let's go, Ig said, getting a nod from his team before they all started on their way. As they did that though, the leader's eyes found their way to Sasori. The puppet master had been given a body before they left, together with a few scrolls with most of the things he'd asked for. Some of them, Onaki hadn't allowed, of course. To make up for that, the Sushikage had added some of the things Ig had suggested. Back on track though, Sasori was now using the only puppet from his army that had survived the fight, courtesy of Kabuto. It had been looked over by Onaki's people and, apparently it was little more than a normal puppet, with its only addition being chains inside both arms. Still, Ig wouldn't be taking his eyes off of him for a while. He'd also make sure that there was always at least one person guarding him. He also had his metaphorical eyes on Kabuto, because as much as he agreed with the Sasori idea, he had gone behind his back to do that. While that made Ig nervous, he also considered the idea that maybe he was worried for nothing. Hakai and Kij seemed to agree with that last part, mostly. They thought this was Kabuto's attempt at showing initiative, which was valid. They'd also pointed out how hard the Mednin had worked to have counters for Sasori's poisons and plans in place if the Akatsuki member got out of hand. Ig was very reassured after they'd discussed it for a bit, actually. Still, just in case, he would still keep an eye out. Ig, slow down, Kabuto said sternly, almost drawing a groan from the boy. I told you, don't overexert yourself. I can go this fast no problem, Kabuto, seriously, he shot back, annoyance almost bleeding into his tone. Sachigumo started growling inside his mind in agreement. Unfortunately, her siblings didn't think like she did. Ig, both Kij and Hakai said, exasperatedly, making the boy deflate and slow down. His team's medic did the same, sighing in relief. For what reason, Ig didn't know, but he was too busy trying to keep himself from getting too annoyed. He wanted to get back home, see his family. He'd missed them a lot, but he'd managed to push that to the side considering the situation. Now that he was on his way, they were practically all that he could think about. Were they okay? The Spider Clan had reassured him they were fine, but he couldn't help but worry. Had they gotten stronger? Some of them had several projects for that, after all. Had they done something interesting while he wasn't around? He wanted to know. Distract yourself, Ig, Hakai suggested, her tone soft and understanding. Ideas? The boy asked, unable to come up with anything. Yujito. Kij offered and Ig had to give him that point. After all, the Kumonin was still going to be around, it seemed. She'd communicated with a few messenger birds that Iwa had offered for them after the Akatsuki was dealt with. Apparently, she'd been told to stay in the team. After much deliberation, Ig and his mind council of sorts had come up with some theories that made sense regarding that. Regardless, Ig was confident he could take her if she was being set up to stab them in the back. Especially if he had the team behind him. The problem would be that if she truly were a traitor, that could mean Killer Bee being thrown into the situation, and that was a guy Ig wasn't confident he could handle. At all. He'd progressed a lot from their last fight, but he was still nowhere near the man's level. Hell, during their fight, Bee hadn't even used his full capabilities. Worrying too much again, Ig, Kij pointed out, sounding exasperated. I know, Ig muttered back, grimacing. Things have gone relatively well so far, I'm just waiting for something to go to hell. I wouldn't say things have gone well, really, Hakai countered vehemently. The nations are hanging to peace by a thread, everyone's watching everyone like hawks, waiting for either an incoming attack or an opportunity for their own. Akatsuki is mostly still out there doing whatever they want, and now they have more information on you and your team, and there's probably at least a handful of other variables that we are not aware of for alternative universe or butterfly effect situations, she explained, and silence followed. Was that supposed to be reassuring? Kij asked, sounding both amused and bemused. He said he was worried because things were going too well. Hakai defended her actions, sounding the smallest bit self-conscious. That helps. I think, Ig replied with a chuckle. At least I appreciate the sentiment. Sachi, girl, do something nice for your sister, will you? Immediately afterwards, he heard the agreeing bark. What? No, there's no need. Sachi, no. Hakai started babbling before she was interrupted. Ig could almost see the chakra beast tackling her and starting to lick her face. So, this is what it's like to be on the other side of that, huh? Kij mumbled then over his sister's protests. Gotta say, I get it now. Oh. It's a little scary that you can beat us even while basically crippled, Tamrai commented conversationally. He can't beat us anymore though, Yujito pointed out with a smile. Speak for yourself, Bimbo number 2, Taeya snapped, making the Jinchuriki's grin grow strained as her eyebrow twitched. When the hell are you going to let us stand on the damn ground, fearless leader? The redhead asked. I think I'll wait until you say please, he decided, before giving himself a nod. Yeah, that sounds about right. Good to know, Jirobo replied. I'll get to meditating in the meantime. Can someone tell me when it's time for dinner? Sure can, Kabuto reassured him. I'll so get you, Fatus, Four Eyes, Taeya growled. It didn't help her argument that she didn't look anywhere close to doing as Ig had said. I'll get some meditation done too, the boy himself decided. Kabuto, Tamrai, you are on watch duty. Yujito, can you accompany Yuki if she wants to take a look around? I can, don't worry, the Kumonin agreed easily. A response that was somewhat undermined by the fact that she was eyeing the Ninkan apprehensively. As it turned out, Yujito didn't like dogs. That just wouldn't do though, no one on his team was allowed to have that opinion and keep it. Before closing his eyes, Ig took one last look around at his team. All of them were hanging by wires that would cackle with electricity if he felt the slightest of twitches. Man, this is fun, he mused with a smirk before he closed his eyes and delved into his mindscape. Time to play with his daughter. Oh. I swear to God, Bimbo, if you have a draw 2-2, I'm gonna Taeya started, before screeching. Because of course Tamrai had one of those. The redhead just had the most terrible luck in Uno. It was actually half the reason everyone voted to play the game every time. Oh. So? Ig asked, for once looking like the young boy he was supposed to be. He was all but bouncing excitedly where he sat, almost unable to stay still as he waited for the verdict. Your chakra pathways seem to be almost completely recovered from the exertion and your body is in top condition, Kabuto informed him. Despite the good news he was delivering, he looked less than thrilled. His face was twisted into a resigned grimace as he added. Yes, you can go back to training in full. Of fucking course. Taeya exclaimed with a groan before turning towards Sasori. Can you kill me? I'm afraid it's too late for that, the puppet master replied, with a flat tone and not looking up from where he was tinkering with the new puppet he'd been working on for the entirety of the trip. He seemed to be remaking his own body, from what Ig could tell. He wasn't sure if it'd be the same as before or with new additions. I'm sure our team leader wouldn't appreciate that. I sure wouldn't, Ig acknowledged with a smirk. I'm the only one allowed to kill you, guys. Now, all of you besides Sasori, get ready, we are sparring before we start moving again. All around, groans resounded, even from Yujito. What does it say about my team that Sasori is the one that doesn't complain? He wondered. I mean, he hasn't been included in the spars yet, it's a little early to say that, Hakai pointed out. Poor guy might be delaying his puppet creation to avoid it, honestly, Kij mused. Oi, I'm not that bad, Ig protested. He was only met with silence. That's it, guy, for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.